We are good to go, Douglas. We are live
All right.
and we can get started.
Great. Well, thank you. I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Douglas Versalati. I'm the president of Intuity Solutions. Scott, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name's Scott Scales. I am the CMO of Intuity Solutions, also a cybersecurity evangelist, working heavily and learning a lot about the current threats and where we're going and how to protect companies throughout our wonderful country.
Good. Thanks, Scott. So I'd like to kind of jump right in here. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a critical issue, I think, that is aware for all of us, and that's really cybercrime. And I want to kind of set the scale to the problem. I think most of us are familiar with cybercrime and how prevalent it is, but sometimes putting some numbers around it really kind of bring it into focus. And currently, in 2023, it's estimated that the cybercrime accounted for more than $10.5 trillion of loss. And I don't know about anyone else, but when you start talking in the realm of trillions with a T, it's really hard for me to imagine that. So try to give you a frame of reference. If cybercrime was a country, cybercrime would account for the third largest GDP behind the United States and China. So it has scale that is pretty much self-evident. But probably what's more alarming, at least from my perspective, more alarming, it's the growth. And the growth from 2015 to 2023. So in over an 8-year period of time, that has more than tripled. So we have really the worst of both scenarios. We have an enormous scale, but we also have high velocity. So I can't really overemphasize the importance of this issue. And I think that's why most people are here today. But I wanted to provide a little bit of a framework put some numbers around that. So, why are we here today? Really, I want to share a few things. Our focus is on understanding your business's vulnerability to cyber threats and the proactive steps that you can take to protect your business. While large-scale cyber attacks are the ones that are always discussed and are in the headlines, the MGMs and the Colonial Pipelines as an example, what we're going to talk about today is what's really alarming, and that is small to medium-sized businesses are becoming and are the target for the cyber criminals today. So the growth I mentioned, that triple from 2015 and 18, is not in the large scale, huge global enterprises. Actually, little known fact, it's in the small to medium sized businesses. And that's what we're here to talk to you about. Part of the reason for that is twofold. One is the criminals have found the small to medium sized businesses are not as protected and their security profile is not as hardened. And they become very wise in how they choose small to medium-sized businesses so that they can extort them for a lot of dollars that you wouldn't normally think is a case, but I'm going to give you an illustration here in a moment. The statistics show that the large companies are not the primary targets anymore. So I'll give you just a quick example of how smart and pinpointed some of these criminals have become. We have an instance where a cyber criminal compromised an email service of a customer and just sat in there and spoofed and read their emails for a long period of time. And they discovered that customer had an $8 million line of credit that was unused. So they had $8 million of available credit to themselves. The cyber criminal unleashed a payload, encrypted the IT systems, and immediately demanded $8 million, for which you can imagine the small customer said, "We don't have $8 million. Well, the cyber criminal immediately presented the fact that they have proof that they do. So the reason that I use it as an example is that one of the baseline thoughts that most people in small to medium-sized business say, look, it's not worth their time to come after us. We're too small. These criminals have become very smart to make it worth their time to come after you. So as a full service IT MSP, we've shifted our focus from being a traditional MSP to protecting our customers. And then unfortunately, in often cases, remediating a breach when one happens. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. IT Intuity Solutions, as I mentioned, we're a full service managed services provider, but our specialization and our focus is around cybersecurity. Our primary focus is safeguarding against cyber threats and breaches. Our services cover all kinds of aspects within IT security, like threat monitoring, vulnerability assessments. We'll talk about that today at length, firewall management, intrusion detection and prevention, security policy development, and incident response. So what we're going to jump right into this is really our agenda today and what we're going to be talking about. So really there's three areas we're going to focus our discussion with you today. And that's around what is a cybersecurity risk assessment? And that's kind of a word salad. So I'd like to, from this point forward, just refer to that as a CSRA and what it provides. The typical time frame associated with a CSRA and what is the process involved? What is your involvement in that assessment? And then what are the next steps involved in hardening your business against cyber threats? So that's really the focus that we're going to be spending time on today, are those three aspects. So in the industry, and I think most people here understand that cybersecurity is a topic that has really been discussed from a lot of different angles and a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of noise about that. It's one of the natural questions that comes up is, who should you listen to? Who should you take advice from? Who's appropriate for you to be partnered with in your business around cybersecurity? We know it's a problem. We know it's large and we know it's evolving. So how do you go about determining who you should be listening to, who should be your advisors? At Intuity Solutions, we have a proven track record in this area. I'll talk about that in detail here in just a moment, and helping clients navigate and recover from unfortunate cyber attacks. Our experience with clients has made us acutely aware of the importance of cybersecurity because we've lived it in the small to medium-sized business marketplace. I want to share just a real quick story of one of our customers that experienced a cyber event 7 years ago now, actually going on 8 years ago. And it was someone who we had worked with, and we had worked with a lot on their IT schema, their architecture, and their infrastructure. So when they were hit, we were able, very fortunately, to be able to recover that data for them. It's not all that common, but we were able to do that. And the figurative bullet zipped past their head. But upon reflection, as we went through that as a company, it fundamentally changed us because we watched a family-owned company look straight down the barrel of the risk of losing their whole business. And it was all because of some cyber criminal halfway around the world who was able to get into their systems and literally erase a family business that's on its fourth generation, 75 years in business. And it really just recalibrated our importance. And we look back at that time and say to ourselves, and here's how we view it, is that we were cybersecurity aware. We had a lot of the policies in place to protect them, and they paid off. But we weren't necessarily cybersecurity focused. And from that point moving forward, we've shifted our focus from being aware to being dedicated around this as our core tenet and our core skill set that we offer our customers. With that, I kind of pause for a second because we've had these conversations, and it's kind of a question I'd like for you to ask yourself is, what would you do? What would be the first step that you would take if tomorrow you went into your business and all your systems were hacked? Number one, do you have an incident response plan in place? Is it actionable? Who would you even call if you don't? Who would be your first call? And really, what would you do sitting at your desk if you lost all of your IT systems? Unfortunately, we've had those conversations with people. We like to have those conversations with people in a proactive manner, identifying gaps and hardening a security posture. But oftentimes we've had that when that literally is the case, when you're sitting across from someone and they cannot connect to any of their businesses. Any of their IT systems within their business. And their business basically comes to a screeching halt. So really, I want to jump into now is, what is this CSRA that we're talking about, and then break that down into a little bit more detail. So what a CSRA helps identify are the vulnerabilities, really, in your defenses against cybersecurity threats that are evolving every single day. It's a crucial step from our standpoint to be able to mitigate your risks. There's really three fundamental areas that we address in a CSRA. The first one is to identify and prioritize the risk areas that are unique to your business based on how your policies, procedures, technologies, and existing safeguards are in place. We need to identify the risks and then associate a prioritization to them. Then we need to protect those assets. And what's also growing in small to medium sized businesses, the third one is really to comply with regulations. And most small to medium sized businesses are unregulated. So a common question I get from owners and managers is, well, we're not a regulated industry. Well, what we're finding and what we can expect to continue to find is the federal government is creating regulations for all companies as it pertains to data and their responsibility to keeping that data protected, whether it's your data, whether it's your customers' data, or many instances your vendors' data, or just a partner's data. So there's regulations that are now underpinning some of this as a result of the increased cybersecurity activity. And I want you to think of a CSRA as kind of a relationship that you have with your primary care physician. If you have a new primary care physician, the first thing they need to do is create a baseline, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, things of that nature, so they can identify where are the gaps before they can even start creating any kind of plan to make sure that we're mitigating any health instances they have now or future ones that may be coming in the down the line. A baseline has to be created. A CSRA is really very analogous to that type of an approach for your health. So depending on what our findings are for the CSRA, what we need to do then is start to look at the next steps. What is the framework and how are we going to approach this? So what that framework really is built around are four key areas. And I'm going to ask Scott to step in and walk through these in much more detail, but I'll identify those four key areas for you now. And then Scott's going to break these out in detail and give you an insight to what actually underpins our ability to give you this risk assessment. It's around four areas, as I mentioned. The first one is people. The second one is processes. Those are the business processes associated with running your business. The technology that you have in your business that you're leveraging today and its uniqueness. And then the data that you are either holding or creating on behalf of yourself, as I mentioned, vendors, partners, etc. So, Scott, can I ask you to kind of step in here and start with discussing these four areas for everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. Be glad to make some expansion on this. As Douglas said, we have a framework, and I'm going to touch on a couple things that Douglas has already talked about, but to reiterate them because they're important and kind of add a little bit more around where we've started. So we always start with protecting the people. And why do we start with that area? Well, the largest threat vulnerability for a cyber attack, quite candidly, who do you think it is? Well, it's your people. And bad actors know this, and this is where they focus their attacks. People are your ultimate wild card in your business, and they're your number one risk because you can't control what they do. You can't control what they open. You can't control what they click on, and you really can't control where they send their credentials. And that leaves you very open to bad things happening. It's a fact that 90% of all data breaches are due to human error. And part of what we do at Intuity Solutions is we support your entire staff and organization through education for your people. This includes helping you draft password policies, security procedures for your team, things like training your people not to open emails from unknown sources, not to click on untrusted links, which is a very common thing, or email attachments without verifying their authenticity. I think we've all kind of seen that in today's world. You get emails, they look very real, and without thinking about it, you click on the link and then it's too late. Another thing that we see is with people is you should never store passwords in a browser. And a lot of us, we get the pop-ups from Chrome, from Edge, from Safari, all those saying, hey, do you want to store your password? Well, you really don't. We don't ever want people to do that. Many of us are guilty of it because it's easy. But the answer is always no. And it's because a browser's primary focus, it's not on password protection. And passwords are stored locally, and that makes it very easy for hackers to get access. So again, we're always working on recommending the proper tools and best practices. Another thing we do is we send out periodic phishing campaigns that simulate emails being sent by a cyber criminal that are trying to target your employees to open them and click the link. Then we provide you with the information that we find so that you know exactly where and who are your areas of vulnerability. And we do this again because 94% of attacks are delivered via email. mean, think about that. That's 94%. So almost all attacks are instigated through email. So how do we protect people? Well, we do that again through training and awareness, the proper tools, and it literally needs to become part of your business culture. So your employees are getting cybersecurity training and awareness. You're doing strong authentication and access control measures for your environment. Employee security policies and guidelines are put in place. Incident response, which Douglas was talking about earlier. What would you do if you sat down and all of a sudden your environment's not there? What do you do? So we have incident response communication plans for the employee level. And then again, phishing and social engineering awareness that are there to also help with mitigation strategies. So people are a really, really big part of our issues. And again, if you look here, I'm going to run across a scenario that kind of brings it home, a real life idea. So we work through different industries. We research different industries in the world of cybersecurity, and we were looking at the trucking industry. And if you look at the trucking industry, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because when a criminal takes down an individual truck, the results can be expensive for a company. But when they take down an entire trucking company, the results can be devastating for a location, for an area, or a product that's being delivered that we all need. If they launch an attack that's big enough and sophisticated enough to take down an entire industry, the impact on the US economy would actually be catastrophic. So think about all the people that this would affect: families, employees, employers, clients. This is why it's so important in adopting a proactive cybersecurity posture to protect the people that are behind the companies that sustain our country. As you can see on the slide, we have 3 stories of very well-known trucking companies that were victims of cyber attacks. And the sheer number of people that these attacks would affect, it's sobering when you really start to think about it. The most consistent and proven way to protect the people in this case is to have them protect themselves. And that's with clearly defined and updated processes and procedures and education. So let's talk more about protecting the processes and what that means. So that's the second step in our process. And Douglas said it earlier, a cybersecurity risk assessment. I'm going to use CSRA for simplicity. It's a tongue twister. So yeah, it can be tough to get it out, but yeah, that's what we call it. So a CSRA helps protect processes by finding weaknesses in day-to-day activities of a company and making them more secure. So if we dive in a little bit deeper, how is a CSRA going to protect your processes? So the risk assessment is going to look at all the things that a company does, and they do them regularly: how they handle information, who can access the information, and then it looks for issues and problems in these processes. Like, what could go wrong and what could you do better? And what could be done when these problems are fixed? So this helps us to kind of to decide which issues are most important. And it basically helps us prioritize those issues and fix them and make a plan so that over time we can keep a close eye on those things and be sure that they stay secure as we move forward. So the question really becomes, do failed process, oops, let me go back one, sorry. Do failed processes matter? Well, yeah, failed processes actually do matter. We just learned that nearly 90% of all data breaches are due to human error. And think about it, that's human error, not anything other than a human being making a mistake, which happens all the time. So to expand on the point, Douglas was telling some stories earlier. I'm going to add one in here. I spent many years in the insurance business. I have friends who are still in the industry and talk with them on a regular basis. Was talking with one the other day, and he's like, hey, we had a cyber claim that came in because there was a CEO's admin received an email and had been tricked into wiring $800,000 from their company to a cyber criminal. It may sound extreme, but this company, they did a ton of transactions, large scale transactions in their day-to-day business. So it wasn't unusual for a large transaction to be requested via email. In this instance, the criminal had breached the email system months before and just sat there watching the network, watching behaviors and communications between the CEO and staff. And at the perfect time, the criminal imitated the CEO, since sending instructions to the admin assistant, telling her to send the $800,000 to one of their clients. And she did exactly as she was told in the email. However, the funds were actually sent to the criminal instead. And this is an example of what we call a social engineering tactic called business email compromise. And that's simply when a criminal tricks a person into doing something fraudulent through email, like transferring funds or sharing sensitive information or changing account details. But the attacker will often impersonate someone higher up in the organization, which creates that false sense of urgency because you always want to do what your boss tells you to do, right? So in this sense, they sadly sent the money, and it's happening more and more. But the moral of the story is, without proper checks, balances, processes in place to verify requests like this, the organization fell victim to wiring money to the cyber criminal. And when you voluntarily send the money somewhere, it's really hard to get it back, if at all. So next, we're going to go in and we're going to talk about the underlying technology that runs your business and what the steps are to help keep the actual technology protected. So one of the most compelling reasons for businesses to be concerned about their cybersecurity is the ever increasing amount of dependence on technology. Think about it. We use technology for everything in our world today. And many companies use sophisticated machinery, systems, and sophisticated navigation tools, communication tools, electronic logging devices, GPS, and the list goes on and on and on as far as things we use technology for. These technologies they obviously have helped businesses streamline their operations, but the more technology that's out there, while they've increased efficiency, they have also made themselves much more vulnerable with cyber attacks. The more endpoints you have, the more things you're using, the more places cybersecurity people look to get, or cyber criminals look to get in. So criminals work nonstop to find cracks in technology. And that's why we have to work as equally as hard to safeguard it. And it's a daunting task. I mean, it is every day, every minute, every second, we're seeing it in the news, and you've got to keep up and you got to stay ahead. So the CSRA is going to help us keep technology safe by looking at all the different technologies in a company: computers, tablets, software, phones, web applications. And we're looking to find issues, weaknesses, or vulnerabilities. It looks like what could go wrong if these issues are not fixed: losing data and getting hacked. I mean, if you don't protect the technology, that's what they're going after. And doing this helps us suggest ways to make the technology more secure, such as updating your software, using strong passwords. It also provides a means to monitor the technology and make sure it stays updated and safe over time. So we're talking about things such as robust network and endpoint security, regular software patching, intrusion detection, firewall configurations. And I don't want to get really, really technical going to all of these, because the importance is that these are just the things that we need to protect. But taking it a little further, password security. MFA is a big deal in today's world. Multi-factor authentication, email security. We talked about phishing, things that we send out, trying to teach people to be more cognizant, but we also have software tools in to help protect against that. Software updates, making sure that you're on the latest versions and patches and security things are updated. Mobile device security. And of course, in the world we live in, regular backups and secure backups. But before we move on to discussing part 4, protecting your data, I want to touch on another point. I think it's important, and Douglas talked about it a little bit earlier. And that is, if you think you're too small to get hacked, you're not. And if you think it only happens to big companies, think again, because it's not true. The 2 stories here on the screen, they've been in the news for different attacks. It's important to note that companies do not want to end up in the news, and in many cases actually never make it to the news. And more cyber criminals are getting smart, and they're going after small to medium-sized businesses because they know they're extremely profitable and they know they're not as well protected. So we've been brought in several times, as Douglas was talking about earlier, to assist companies that have experienced data breaches and ransomware. And you never saw these companies in the news, but the damage was really, really heavy to the owners, the employees, their customers, and to these companies. And in many times it can be catastrophic. I mean, if you walk in and your bank account's been emptied and you can't, or you're not emptied, but you can't get to anything and you can't run your business, that's a true catastrophic loss. So basic moral of the story: no one's too small to get hacked. And we need to really keep that in mind, because there's that underlying security. Oh, it'll never happen to me. until it does. And then it's a lot easier to prevent it than it is to try and recover from it. So we've covered protecting the people, we've covered protecting the processes and the technology. Let's talk a little bit now about the final piece, which is protecting the data. So let's start with a question. I'd like you to ask yourself, and Douglas talked about this earlier, if your data or your customer's data is at risk. Many companies deal with vast amounts of data in today's world, from shipment details, customer information, employee information. And protecting this data is not only a matter of business integrity now, but it's also a legal requirement. Regulatory bodies have established strict guidelines for data security and privacy. Financial institutions are subject to FTC safeguard rules. Hospitals and medical practice are subject to HIPAA. I'm sure everybody signed HIPAA forms when they've gone in to see their doctor. But honestly, every company that has data that if it's in the wrong hands could be at risk. So real quick, let's look at how CSRA can protect your organization. What it's going to do is it's not only going to look at the data, but the hardware devices that store the data. Obviously, if a hacker were going to go into a system to get something, it's the data they want, the sensitive data that they'd be looking for to export. And as we mentioned before, hold for ransom or sell on the dark web. For many companies, you fall under the FTC safeguards that were put in place as of June of last year. They require non-banking financial institutions, including companies like vehicle dealerships, to take specific steps to protect the customer data they actually collect. And in these industries, the fines are really, really stiff, up to $100,000 per violation, with an additional $10,000 to the owners and to the directors and the officers of the company. And any damages for consistent violations as much as $43,000 per day. So think about a $43,000 per day fine for violations. Now, the FTC is a topic that we will discuss in another webinar, but if you need more information or need help with compliance, just drop a comment in the chat or schedule time on our calendar to book a strategy session. We'll share that link with you at the end of the webinar and make sure that you have a way to get in touch with us on that. So why do criminals want your data? Well, it's kind of obvious in today's world. It's very valuable. If you think about it, because data is valuable, one stolen identity currently is worth about $1,000 on the dark web. That's just one. And you see attacks where hundreds of thousands of people have their data exposed. And think about that times $1,000 per person. So the hackers can sell your data to other criminals. It's big business. It is like using a shopping cart for them. You know, they sell data back and forth. Login details are needed for takeover accounts can be sold so that other cyber criminals can get involved. Stolen data is used to target extortion and phishing attacks. Again, ransomware, getting into somebody's network, taking control of it, and taking the data. And stolen personal information is fuel for identity theft, which is one of the biggest things we hear all the time is protect your identity. And you know, it used to be, hey, don't let it be your credit card. Well, that's just a minor piece of it in today's world. So in addition to all these wonderful things, we also have the issue that lawsuits against companies who have been hit with data breaches are becoming more and more common. So what do we do? So when we're going to protect your data, we incorporate processes like data encryption, both in transit and rest, data classification and access controls, data loss prevention technologies, regular data backups and recovery procedures, and data security processes, policy standards, and guidelines. So it's a very complex, very complete 4-step framework. And as you can tell, just from what we've gone through, there's a lot to it and it's consistently changing. But at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hand it back to Douglas. I'm going to let him discuss, now that we've talked about what a CSRA is, what it takes to actually have one completed for your business and what that process looks like.
Thanks, Scott. So one of the things we want to talk about is really, you know, the scale of this and the time frame associated with it. But before I jump into that, what I'd like to do, Scott, is I want to make sure I'm right on the slides here, is to talk about cyber insurance. So
we can start from here. This is a good place.
Good. Yes. Thank you. So one of the first questions I get when we talk about cyber insurance with business owners is they question, hey, I really don't need a thorough security posture if I have insurance. If I have a claim, I just file insurance, and they kind of want to just brush it off and think that insurance is going to take care of their problems. And I think all of us know it's not a real wise approach. And one of the things that we need to look at is how insurance and cyber insurance and your security posture really have a symbiotic relationship, and they go hand in hand. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit of detail here. Is that, but before we go to there, the insurance industry has been getting inundated with claims, as we talked about at the beginning of this, and Scott has walked through as well. The increase in all of these crimes and all of these attacks obviously is an increase on claims with the insurance companies. And insurance companies are not in the business to paying claims; they're in the business to retaining that money. So what the insurance companies have starting to build and harden for themselves are exclusions and sublimits to the policies, so they protect themselves, so they can protect themselves from just having all of these claims being filed and them having to pay them out. Obviously is very unprofitable for them, and they're getting smarter. And so they're building in the processes within their application process for customers to protect themselves. So as they're offloading the responsibility to the business to make sure they have the proper security measures in place, proper posture, and the processes associated with that. Because if they don't, the insurance company can't just constantly be paying out claims for people who are not keeping a tight shop, so to speak. So one of the most relevant things we look at from afar is the most relevant social proof of whether this is a real problem or not is the increase in the price of cyber risk insurance. The cyber insurance premiums are being skyrocketed. Why? Because of all the claims. Well, all the claims are happening because of all the attacks. So in reference to all this, in response to all this, at Intuity Solutions, one of the unique things we bring to our customers is the ability to help navigate this whole insurance process. And it really starts with the insurance application process. And when cyber insurance first came out, the application process was very undefined. And we look back in the rearview mirror and we see insurance companies really didn't know the right questions to ask. The customers didn't really know how to answer those questions. And as a result, there was a lot of inaccuracy. Well, that's changing and changing rapidly. And we've seen instances where customers felt like they were covered, felt like they had a policy in place, but because they didn't go through the detail in the application process, and they didn't go through the detail of having a proper security posture, the insurance company had mechanisms in place to deny those claims. And I can say this honestly, that one of the most bone-chilling kind of realities is for a business owner to be hit with a cybersecurity event. But only worse than that is when they have that event and they felt like they were covered with a policy that they've been paying on, only to find out because of a variety of reasons, and it's spending the time to having a correct, hardened security posture, they were not actually able to receive the claim that they filed that they thought they had coverage for. And so in response to this, we work hand in hand with our customers to be able to navigate the application process. But the good news to this is that going through a CSRA allows for all those gaps to be identified, plans to be put in place to harden. So when that application process takes place, we can not only answer it thoroughly and accurately, but because we have the answers, oftentimes our customers find that one, they can be underwritten. And many customers, and I'm sure several of you recognize this, they apply for cyber insurance but are denied because they can't answer the questions thoroughly enough to provide the assurances to the insurance company that they're a good risk. But by doing so with our customers, not only are they more often than not granted that the underwriting, they get the insurance company agrees to underwrite them, but they enjoy a better premium because they can answer the question so thoroughly, and they're a lower risk, plain and simple, for the insurance company. So, our thought is that we feel that security, cybersecurity, and cybersecurity insurance go hand in hand. Think of security as a proactive stance, and your insurance as a reactive stance. But when you look at your business in its entirety and your goal is to protect that asset in every way that you know how, the most thorough way to do so is having a very active and hardened security posture married with an accurately written in cyber insurance in coverage. So in the event something takes place and a breach takes place, that you have the proper coverage. Of course, our goal is not to allow the breach to take place, but we know that they happen. As Scott mentioned, people are the biggest wild card in all of this, and that's where 94% of the attacks vector through. So it happens, but if it happens, we have the proper insurance. And that's really the best posture that we have seen in our experience for our customers to enjoy. And the last point on this is I've had this conversation, I've had this question, our IT department's good. They're good at what they do. We feel like, we're covered. And we don't really need a comprehensive, CSRA to tell us that. Well, what we have actually found is not that. What we have found is your IT staff is burdened with the day-to-day running of your business, and they don't enjoy the freedom and the time and the focus that it takes to, one, stay relevant in this space, and two, to dedicate the energy and focus to be able to complete an analysis to have a thorough understanding of what your security posture is. So oftentimes our customers are more, when we first start dealing with them, they feel more confident that they're protected than what after a CSRA kind of produces the information for them to realize that actually they're more vulnerable than they actually realize. So, where do we go from here? The reality is we talked about this at length. I think everyone recognizes these security risks are real. And as a small business, you really are left to ask yourself this question. This is kind of how I want to wrap up, is knowing what we know about this threat. Is this something that you want to go about alone? Do you want to go about protecting your business while running your business simultaneously? Or do you want to partner with a qualified team of professionals that spend their career and their time focused solely in this area? That is really the question I think we leave you with, as we've shared with you what a CSRA is, what's going on in the industry as far as the amount of these attacks that aren't publicized. You're not going to find them in the newspaper. You're not going to find them on the news. So you really have to ask yourself, do you feel like you're as protected as you need to be and as you should be? So on the next slide, I'm going to click over here in a second, is a QR code that you can scan. And that QR code will schedule a free strategy session with us. What that is really about a 20-minute conversation where we can point you in the right direction and create a plan of action to be able to address how to move forward to protect your business through the methods that we discussed today. So I'm going to click over to that and hand back to Scott to see if there's any questions that we have in the chat or any questions anyone would like to ask that we can answer. Scott, is there anything we can address?
No, I think at this point we're good. I will stay here, and I'm going to go and move the slide over real quick to the last slide. So as Douglas was saying, next steps, you can use the QR code, or you can go to bookyourcybersecurity or strategyreview.com. Either one of these will take you to our calendar where you can book the short call that Douglas was talking about. Again, not a hard pitch sale or anything like that. It is to really work with people, to let them understand where they are, where they might need to go, and help you get in the world of cybersecurity where you need to be headed. So I will say that after these events, we do get our calendars booked up pretty quick. So you'll want to go on and get on our calendar as quickly as you possibly can. And we'll look forward to talking with each of you and answer your questions. I know on a lot of these presentations, we don't get a lot of questions in the chat because people want to talk directly with somebody. So we will wrap up our event for today. Douglas, thank you. And everybody who's attended today, thank you very much. We look forward to taking your calls, and we will see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.